And we are back at Shenanigans, Mick. You know, we kind of bounce around a little bit, but we always kind of seem to find our way back here. Andy takes care of us, gets us set up in this back room so we can social distance, you know, still with the COVID stuff going on. And, you know, I know you've been working on stories of the COVID stuff. Are you still working on that for this week, or what do you got going?
No, definitely. One story that came out today was just kind of spelling out what we should expect and how are we going to find out. Just basic stuff. How are you going to find out when it's your turn to go get the vaccine? And what are some things you should be prepared for when you go in to get that shot, that first shot? And just kind of trying to answer some of those basic questions about how it's going to go once the rollout gets to us. And other than that, also working on a story about women providers, a doctor and a nurse in this case, who are pregnant and decided to get the vaccine, and they're not, the CDC is not official on that yet, that it's okay, because the clinical trials they didn't have time to go to pregnant women on it. And yet these people, they wanted to keep working. They wanted to help, you know, do the things they've always done, and looking at kind of how to analyze the science, and got the vaccine. There's no proof at all. There's nothing out there that suggests that vaccine is harmful for women. They just haven't had a chance to test yet. I guess it's where he makes the clarification on that. And yet at the same time, COVID does, I mean, there's a lot of evidence out there that dealing with COVID while you're pregnant is a big deal. And or potentially can be a big deal with long-term ramifications, all these things. And it was very interesting just talking to these people and how they arrived at the decision that, yes, I'm going to get the vaccine. And I'm very confident that I'm able to get the vaccine, and this is the best thing for me and you know, the baby I'm going to have. So pretty compelling stuff.
Yeah. You know, we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but a whole new level of, you know, what's good for me and what's good for you and what's good for, you know, my family. In this case, you know, a mother and a child before it's even born, you know, a lot to think about, but, you know, hopefully we're on that, you know, that downslide of, you know, people starting to get the vaccine and we're moving forward on it.
Yeah. And in terms with pregnant women, I mean, they have their own decisions to make, and they don't have to, you know, it's not forced on anyone, but in how they talk to women who are pregnant, and they lay it out for them as best they can, and you know, then it's basically in your hands.
Awesome. Look forward to reading that. You know, Mick, last week we had Taryn Close. But first of all, before we get to last week, I want to tell you a little bit about my day today. It's been a big day. Okay, it's been a big day. First of all, we're not talking about it because we don't want to tell everybody how old I am, but it's my birthday today. So it's always a big day when it's your birthday. But the other thing is you know, I told you a story about Gracie, our golden retriever that comes with me to speak, and, you know, is kind of a therapy dog, and she's had to retire because of her bad legs. And we got this new puppy. Okay. Got a new puppy, new golden retriever about a month ago. And today we had to say goodbye to her for a month because she's going to Minneapolis to puppy school to hopefully be the first part of her training to be a therapy dog. So been an emotional day for me because, you know, first of all, really another birthday? I mean, I've had a lot of them. Yeah, they seem to come faster and faster. Then we had to drop the puppy off, and you know, even after a month, that little thing's, you know, been part of our family. So it's been a big day in my family.
I want to know more. The public school, is this Division I or?
The puppy school, it is not full scholarship.
Okay.
It is not full scholarship as of yet. I have a few grants out there that I'm waiting on. So maybe it will be. Well, maybe we could talk to our guests a little bit about that transition to Division I.
What did the puppy get on her ACT? That's going to be the determining factor.
She scored very high.
Okay.
Very high. So, and then Mick, last week we had Taryn, before we get to our guest, last week we had Taryn Cloth on, and, you know, I was struck all week about, you know, how personable she was, and, you know, really what a great story it is for a local girl from South Dakota to be doing such great things in the sport of volleyball. Now on the beach volleyball, which was interesting to learn a lot about that. But how cool was that to talk to her?
What an incredibly gifted human being, and it was video gold to get the big old man to have to talk about his daughter and how much love is there, and just the appreciation for what his daughter has accomplished in her life. It was so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate Taryn for joining us, and Big Mike. Like we talked about, Mike has been a friend of Mick and I's for a long time, so we appreciate that. So let's get to this week's guest. We kind of like volleyball experts now, I guess. Yeah. After this week, we'll be known as the volleyball guys, I guess, because joining us is Augustana University head volleyball coach Jennifer Jacobs. Thanks for joining us, Coach.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And for sure, you just need to talk to two volleyball people, and you guys got it. Right. Done.
Last week I was stumbling for, I knew she played beach, and I was trying to figure out the words that describe the normal volleyball. And they made fun of me for that, but we figured that out. So yeah, Coach, you don't coach beach volleyball here at Augustana, but talk about, maybe let's go take a step back and, how did you get to Augustana? Where'd you grow up and things like that?
Yeah, so I am originally from St. Paul, Minnesota for the most part. That's kind of where my childhood, I would say it was, formative years anyway. And my eighth grade gym teacher said, it happened to be the volleyball coach at that time, and Kathleen Kramer is her name, and she used to be Miss Ryan back in the day, but she was like, you should come out for the volleyball team. And I was just nervous and just didn't know anybody. And so I did, because she asked me to, and I made the eighth grade team. And she actually coached at Highland High School in St. Paul, and I ended up going to Central and tried out there, made JV as a freshman. And by the end of that kind of freshman year, I was on the varsity, and then you just get into it, right? That's kind of what you do in athletics. Just, okay, here we go. And I remember probably the end of my sophomore year in high school realizing that, I could maybe play in college. Just maybe is a thing that could happen. And so I started looking at places, but had no idea. This was like before social media. This is before, I was getting mailing letters, like literally letters. They'd like fill out and mail back to somebody. And I could not do this job back then. No way. There was just like these tapes that you're sending out, and I couldn't even imagine. But visited a few schools. Ultimately didn't really want to go far from home. And so I ended up playing at Mankato and had a nice experience there from 2000 to 03 and graduated in 04. And then after that, I was one of those kids that didn't really know what they wanted to do. Very unlike the kids that I now coach, who know usually what they want to do when they come into school. But I ended up moving back to the cities. And you were talking about dogs earlier. So I'm a huge dog person. Side note, this necklace was given to me by my grandmother. It is a Best in Show necklace, and when her top dog won Best in Show for the 5th time, my grandfather gave her this necklace. So yeah, we're a huge dog family. So I was just chuckling when you were talking about your love for dogs, because I get it. But anyway, so I actually ended up going back to the cities and working at a dog daycare as a side hustle or side job. And then got into coaching high school. I was coaching at Harding High School, JV, and then varsity, and working there. And then was really, 10 years ago, 15 years ago now, if you would have asked me what I thought I'd be doing right now, I thought I was going to be a high school principal. I really was kind of figuring out, like in the K-12 realm, and my master's is in K-12 educational administration. So that's what I was going to do. And I ended up working at Richfield High School, and the athletic director there, Todd Olson, his son actually, he had 3 sons, and one of them played football for USD actually. I can't think of his name. I think Trevor Olson is the one that ended up playing here a couple years back. But anyway, he was the one who said, hey, there's a half AD, assistant AD, half volleyball job open at Augsburg College, now university, up in the Twin Cities or up in Minneapolis. And It's like, I think you should apply. So applied and ended up getting that job. And I was there for 5 years. And during that time, I had met our previous AD, Slade Larscheid, literally coming home from NCAA convention on the plane, and we just got to chit chatting. And so we stayed in contact. And then when this job came open, he called me and said, I think you should apply. So it's one of those just kind of whirlwind, was not looking to leave necessarily, but you end up where you're supposed to be, right? So here I am.
Awesome. And first of all, what kind of dogs?
So my grandparents used to raise and show English Cockers and Pointers. And then I have don't ask me why, but I have an affinity and I've always loved Great Danes. And so we have a Great Dane now. His name is Mikey. And he's my third. So I've had 3 Great Danes. So yeah.
Wow. Awesome. And then, you mentioned growing up, finding volleyball as a love. Did you play other sports growing up, or did you, just kind of hit volleyball and then stayed with that?
Yeah, loved volleyball. Immediately loved it. Everyone always asks me, like, why isn't she playing basketball? I used to be super athletic back in the day, definitely not anymore, but everyone was like, oh, you should be playing basketball. And that was just what you're supposed to do. And I didn't like the contact piece of it in basketball. And so volleyball was a good, super athletic sport that you could play, dynamic. And I had a vertical back in the day, so I was successful at jumping, and that helps you in volleyball. But yeah, no, I just got into volleyball. I started playing club, which is really important to be able to continue on to college. And in college, they had asked me if I wanted to use that kind of 5th season of eligibility for track, for running, because I was relatively quick. They had a couple of things they wanted me to do, but I just was kind of tired and burnt out at that time. But yeah, no, volleyball has just been kind of it.
And then you mentioned your time at Augsburg. I spent some time at Augsburg, 2 different stints way before you were there. But if you've seen in the gym, the pictures, the posters of Devin George.
Yeah.
Devin is I'm the reason Devin spent 10 years in the NBA. I coached Devin. And so, I think my picture should be up there next to his, because if it wasn't for me, he wouldn't have made the NBA. No.
Yeah.
What a great school Augsburg is, a unique campus right in the middle of downtown Minneapolis like it is. But, learning at that Division III, how did that help you when you moved up to the Division II level?
Yeah, I would say, so it was a blessing to be back in D2 just because I had played D2. And honestly, when I first got the job, I had spent so much time. I have coached very high level club. The club players I coached are arguably almost all Division I players, Power 5 level. So I've been very fortunate in that sense. But then in Division III, it was just a different, there's just so much more balance. There's just so much more academic and life balance. And the athletes that I coached in Division III were just as committed as, the top athletes that I coached in club, going to the Gophers or wherever. So I think it was just a good spread for me to have to play Division II, coach D1 club kids, and then coach Division III. And I would say too, then coming here, Augsburg's not that different to Augustana in the sense of size or private, small liberal arts college. There's more in common than there is difference, I think. And so that was huge. I really like smaller schools, even though I went to Mankato and it was relatively medium-sized or big. I don't remember it being that big. But when you're athletics, when you're in an athlete or in athletics you're in a small group anyway. But yeah, I think it prepared me just to kind of, private schools are a little bit different. They're just different. They operate differently. There's a lot more flexibility, honestly. We're not tied to the same sort of, rules and regulations that state schools have. And that's not anything wrong with that. It's just, there's just a little more freedom in my job, which is nice.
Jen, just curious about going from being a player to all of a sudden deciding you're going to coach, regardless of level. What were some things that you learned as you went along? It's like, that you know this sport and you like it, but coaching it is a completely different thing in some ways. How did that work for you?
Yeah, I think I started out in college. So while I was in college, we were allowed to coach club, and so I ended up coaching club. I don't even know what the club is there in Mankato, but it used to be called Mankato Juniors when I was there. And so I was just an assistant to my head coach. And it was more because I was just a gym rat. I wanted to be around the game, wanted to play. You know, I always got to be the one that got to jump in and play if we were short a player or something like that. And so I just started to learn. You just started absorbing. I would say I didn't become a student of the game until probably my junior year. I had survived physically just on my athleticism up until then. But then when you're a junior and the whole conference they know you and what you can do, you really had to start learning how to beat the other team or how to beat players. And I love that side of the game. I mean, mentally, if I could have been a setter, I would have. I love that side of the game and like the strategy behind it and thinking about how to win. But I have no setter talent. never did. But yeah, I think it was just that time. And then when I spent a lot of time at Northern Lights volleyball club, which is out of Burnsville, Minnesota, there's just so many really good coaches that have gone through there. And so being able to just learn a lot of my training and learning how to train has come from them for sure.
Awesome. And then, so now you're at Augustana University, and, you know, you mentioned, I think it might have even been before we started talking about, you know, some of the players that you had. You know, you were lucky to come into a program that had some really good players. And now, you know, how's that transition been to a head coach, and where you see your program now and where it's going?
Yeah, I'm excited. I love our program right now. We are in a really good spot, and I absorbed some very, very, very talented players. The previous coach, who is now at Louisville, he was here for 18 months. He did a great job. And like when I came in here in my fall of 17 first season, there was 5 starting seniors that had all had playing time the year prior, and so I didn't have to do a whole lot. And arguably, that we had a really good season in 17, and it didn't really have anything to do with me. I just had to keep the ship going. The team definitely had the direction, but it was under a different coach, and so a different feeling and different environment of the team. And so I eventually started to speckle in kind of my own thing. The 2018 class had already been, one person had been committed, Avery Thorson, our current setter right now. And she's a great athlete. I walked into her already being committed, and so I just had to keep her essentially as a recruit, which was great. And then we signed a great outside, Grace Haberland out of Colorado, and then Kelsey Ruff out of Iowa rounded out that class. So it's been interesting, and it was also interesting, like trying to just remember how good our league is in volleyball. And it's better than it was when I played. And when I played, Mankato was still in the NCC, and that was still in existence. But I mean, our league is so good. And I mean, every single player that we have right now can play Division I. We frequently, we butt up again. I mean, we lost a kid to KU this year, so it's not like it's like some pooey Division I. These are really good schools. So I think it's just been realizing like how good we are and the level of kid that we can recruit. But that's been fun. That's the fun part, right? Like I love recruiting, and I missed not recruiting last season or last year at all.
And you mentioned your league. You know, people got to understand, if you're in the top and you're competing to win your league, you're in the top of the country.
100%.
You know, and you know, you've got 3 or 4 teams usually in that top 20, top 25. You know,
Yep.
and that's exciting, but that's got to be, you know, very stressful too. You know, there's not many days off when you're going against the best teams in the country.
Yeah, it's a bane and a boon. The good news, and this is what teams like Concordia St. Paul and SMSU have been able to prove. You know, if you are competing at that level day in and day out, you are well prepared to win a national championship once you make it past our region. Now, our region itself is so hard to get out of. You have, I think right now, I mean, there's at the end of 2019 season, there was 8 in the conference ranked in the top 25, 6 in the top 15. And then, the other 4 happen to be in our region. So it's like, you have to get out of that region. Nebraska Kearney had a good year 2 years ago. They took second at nationals. But again, if you do that kind of competition day in and day out, you're ready to win once it's time. So, and I think our players appreciate that. They love it. You know, they would prefer to compete like that every night. than, rolling over player or rolling over teams or something.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, obviously with COVID, recruiting has changed, all that, but let's give an update on where the seasons sit today. Obviously you didn't play in your normal time in the fall. So where's the season sit today?
Yeah, right now, well, I will say this. So this past fall, 2020, our team was gearing up, and physically and emotionally and mentally, the Elite Eight for D2 was supposed to be here at the Pentagon this year or this past year. And so I think our team was very much geared up to win, to be here for that championship and to fight like dogs to get into it. And I don't like, as far as where the team is at, that fight has not left. I mean, they are still very determined to be back in that hunt, and I have no doubt that they will be. And as far as our season goes now, it's a spring season. Our conference will not be having a conference championship, and so we're trying to kind of piecemeal matches together and what that means. The hard part, I think, for me as a coach is that we have conferences near us in our own region who have come out with a conference schedule per se, and it could be good, could be bad for us in the future. We don't know. It remains to be seen. We'll try and get as much competition as we can in. It is officially our championship season, and so I'm working on scheduling matches against programs that are close to us, at least for now. And then we'll see what happens. It's hard when we also have schools in different states. So the state schools in Minnesota are under a whole other jurisdiction of rules than we are as a private school. So that kind of leads into some goofy different things too.
That sounds like a pain to me. It would seem that coaching a volleyball team, a college volleyball team, and directing that traffic and recruiting and staying up on all of this would be enough of a job. But to really have this urgency toward a schedule and making phone calls about that, I would guess that it's a nice little addition to your set of responsibilities there.
Yeah. It is an added extra piece, and it is what it is, though. It is what it is. We got to get our players playing. They want to play. They need to play. We need to play. And because that's the only, you can train all day, but to have that competition, like against somebody else, not just inter squad scrimmages, which we will do too. But it's important to see other people across the net. We always, we schedule our own preseason tournaments. So we get 2 preseason tournaments every year before we start conference. And that's always kind of a funny thing just because of how good our region is and how good our conference is. So at least we have some experience in trying to navigate that there. But yeah. And I'll say this too. The coaches in the league, I love them. You call them up and you say, hey, let's get together. Let's do a home and away. And they're like, okay, let's figure it out. It's more just figuring out the dates of when they're going to be because everyone's doing different things with their academic schedules with COVID. So that's probably it's more figuring out like when and how we can make it work too. So, yeah.
So let me ask you, if I could, throughout COVID, how have things been at Augustana? Maybe some changes that you've seen and, are there any changes that you've liked that we've had to go through?
I would say the number one thing I've liked, the silver lining around COVID, is I prefer to work from home actually when I can. And so I like working from home. I can get work done. There is something to say about being in the office and seeing lots of people and it being bustling, but when I need to like focus, I like being at home. So that is like my personal silver lining. I give it to our administration, athletic administration and school administration. And again, going back to that being a private school, we're bound to only our own rules really. And so we've just had more freedoms. I was able to get out and recruit faster than other coaches in our league. I was able to, have access to my athletes faster, or at least communicating with them. They were able to come back to campus earlier and do lifting and running with what they can do within the rules. It was nice that they were back on campus this summer and they were chomping at the bit to get back on and do stuff because they were trying to piecemeal together workouts at home. And our campus was gracious enough to use the athletes as kind of okay, how are we going to do this? Let's navigate this safely. And so they came back in pods and very, succinct, special really special ways. But it also gave the school an idea, the institution an idea, or how it was going to be when students came back in the fall, non-athletes. So it was good, I think, for both sides. And there are institutions out there that are still trying to figure that out. So we were lucky in that sense.
Awesome. So as you go forward, recruiting wise, is it, obviously it's different. You seem like somebody that likes to be out in front of people as well. I imagine that's been hard, recruiting's got to be very difficult. It's always difficult.
Yeah.
Not being able to see people play, to get see how they actually interact with their teammates and how athletic they actually are. But then, building those relationships, how difficult has that been?
Well, I'm one of those coaches that I think most coaches can tell right away if a kid is athletic or not to play for you or play at your level, right? Okay, kid regularly touches 10 feet. Perfect. She can play for us. She's at our height. But it's the other stuff that you want to see. Like, I need to see a kid's reaction live in multiple different situations against multiple different teams. And I'll watch kids from different angles of the courts. And we just haven't been able to do that. And we're just starting now to get back onto it. So hopefully President's Day weekend will be the first weekend where I can actually be out, or we can actually be out and seeing players. But yeah, I mean, as far as the communication thing, we just have had to get really more intentional about it. It's not like we weren't making phone calls or intentional stuff before. Again, the silver lining of COVID is that we've been able to, I think, be more intentional about getting things to players or to recruits faster. We hadn't utilized our virtual tour that admissions had put together in the past. We just hadn't needed to utilize it. But COVID was like, okay, if we can't get players on campus, they need to see our campus. So let's at least show them this, and then we'll see when we can get them on campus. So just those kind of checkpoints where we touch on recruits, I think has changed a little bit.
Mick, before we move on to some other things, now that we're volleyball experts, you got any more volleyball questions for Coach?
Service line, I know that's a controversy in the game right now.
Are there anything in the volleyball world that, in basketball, there's always rule changes going on, or points of emphasis, in volleyball, are there talks about rule changes or points of emphasis that two stupid guys would understand?
Yeah, they do. So they do volleyball rules every other year, and it's a rule change year this year. People are always, I don't quote me on this, but I think one up right now is like allowing the double contact. So when like a player, sets a ball, or either set it or not, if they set the ball and they mishandle it somehow and that ball spins or does some goofy thing that isn't clean out of their hands, there are people out there that would like to see if that happens and it's towards a teammate on their side of the net, that should be legal. And it's not right now. It's a judgment call. In general, you could see if it's bad or not. But people are arguing that if it's to their own side, to their own teammate, who cares? So we'll see that. There's also a lot of talk. So Division I has it already, the video review system. And you're able to challenge during matches a call, certain calls, not all calls. And so that's trickling down into Division II. A number of Division II conferences already use it and have it. Our conference does not, but that's only going to, I think, we're only going to see that more and more at our level anyway. So we'll see.
Awesome. And obviously, as a coach, you have the ear of your team, and you can, you're teaching them volleyball, but you're teaching them a lot more than just volleyball. And if anybody follows her on social media, you got a lot going on, and I don't want to say, how do I say it? You are passionate about certain topics, and empowering women is one of them. And what's that like, being able to lead these women, to maybe be a college volleyball coach at some point, or, get into politics or whatever it may be. What's that like for you to have that opportunity?
Amazing. Honestly, I don't know if it's because I was raised by a single mom or where that kind of came in, or if I have ever been, just always, I've always felt a propensity towards women supporting women. I really believe it. I really believe, and it's not a man hating thing. I don't hate men. My fiance is a man, and I love him very much. But I feel like women need to really support women. And there is this thing out there in the corporate world, in the sport world, you name it, wherever it's like, there can only be one woman at the top, or there can only be, one woman, I don't know, CEO or whatever. And I just don't aspire or don't agree with that. And to get to where we need to be, I just believe that women really have to support women and champion women. And so that's the platform that I believe in, speak about. I think our players know that and respect that. I think they operate that way as well. I think it's a good selling point. The other thing that's interesting is that volleyball is behind women's basketball, and we have, in the sense that we have less women coaches that coach women's volleyball than even in women's basketball. And everyone, I know that the basketballs are in the news, and so that's what you hear about. But there's a lot of men, and great men, but that coach women's volleyball. And so I believe that women volleyball coaches need to have women in front of them coaching it, or else they're not going to want to do it or see if they can do it. I choose to only have an all-female staff. It's not because I don't like guys. It's because I really think it's important for them to see that. So yeah, it's always been a big piece of my life. And I believe that the women who come through our program also subscribe to that same thinking. So yeah.
And you're on this committee. I was reading about that just kind of came about because of some of the, I don't know if the committee just started or you got on it just about the time of some of the social unrest and things that we got going on in our country. Can you kind of tell us what you got going on with that?
Yeah, so when I was at Harding, it was during No Child Left Behind Act. And so that was when we started seeing like the data for what the students that were succeeding in schools looked like, and the ones what they didn't look like, right? And so I was starting to do a lot of thinking and researching around what was then titled the achievement gap. Now it's dubbed the opportunity gap, and maybe it even has a different name now. But I was working with that in the high school, at the high school level. And so that's when I started thinking about, okay, what's happening? And I tell this story all the time. I got to tell you guys. So I remember also going back and being in high school, and there were three Black males who were my classmates. And they had the most athletic talent in the world. I mean, we're talking, that was when North Carolina basketball and Duke basketball, like they would come travel and watch our high school games because these guys were that good. But they didn't have the GPAs to go on to play at that level. And I was thinking here, like, okay, I don't have the best GPA, but it's enough to get into Mankato. And my school's paid for. Like, that's a college education to get to that next space, kind of in society and socially, and that upward mobility that we talk about, education giving people. And so I remember just that's always stuck with me, and that I was afforded so many opportunities because I was athletically inclined and able to get a college education because of that. And here are these three Black males, somehow for whatever reason didn't have whatever they needed to have to get to that next step. And here they were getting looks at by Duke and the big boys. And so I just remember being like, wow, like, what are we missing? Like, where are the schools failing these kids? So then fast forward, that's how I kind of got into DEI work. And it just kind of took off, honestly. As I did more and more work, I did more and more personal learning and reading on my own privilege, and then started speaking once I got into Augsburg, really. Started doing a lot of staff development stuff. And then fast forward to now, so Philando Castile, I went to high school with, and he was one of the first tragedies in the Minnesota area, or in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And that hit our school. My high school is pretty close, just still. And that hit our school community pretty hard. And then when George Floyd was murdered, we all know the country just erupted. And so it was just yet another, I was actually living blocks from where that happened, right before I moved here. So that was my community. the store that was right on the corner, that I went to that store pretty regularly. So it just hit home. And our AD, Josh Morton, asked me, and he knew that, and we kind of talked some more, and he knew I had this kind of other DEI life out there, and he asked me to do some trainings for our staff. And so that's where it started. And then we ultimately formed a committee, and now it's rolling. We actually have a meeting next week that I got to get ready for. But yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey, and I'm so glad and thankful that my colleagues at Augustana are also wanting to be on that journey. We do it together.
So as you go through this journey, do you incorporate that teaching as well into your with your ladies on the volleyball team?
Yeah, we definitely had some in-depth conversations. Right after George Floyd was murdered, we were already on Zoom because that was over the summer. And so we dedicated a couple phone calls to that. We really practice. We have a very strong faith in our team. Our players have very strong faiths, and they're not all the same, but Christian based. And so a lot of our conversations were around that, and what that means, and what does it mean for our society to be going through what we're going through right now. And we're not done, and we won't be done. But we had some heavy, tough conversations, and they aren't done. And every time I try and be very cognizant of what's going on in the world, because it affects our players, and it affects my staff, and it affects people. And so I try to be very cognizant as things come up. I don't shy away from it. I don't not talk about it. We bring it up and we talk about it. And I'll put out there and say, hey, do we need to talk about this as a team, or how are we doing, or where are we at, or you tell me. The team is very much our program. The team leads it. They have ownership, they have leadership in the program, and so they're very free to tell me what they need, which I would rather have it that way. I don't have to be the expert.
Absolutely. I do a lot of speaking I go into schools and we talk about inclusion and being kind to one another, just a lot of things like that. And, sometimes I'll bring a Native American young man with me, or somebody that's, Jackson Monk, who's in a wheelchair. And, we see the difference right there. But, a lot of times it's like, okay, what do I call you? What do I, you're in a wheelchair, but how do I introduce you? And we just watched a little clip you were on one of the local TV stations, and you used the term and this is how dumb I am. I've got to read this and I'll screw up, intersectionality.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And explain that to me.
Correct. So intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and she was working in, I believe, California, but she was a K-12 educator, and so she was doing research at one point in time on, it happened to be African-American Black girls and suspension rates. And she was finding that they were being suspended at a very higher rate to girls in general, and then also white girls, and what was going on there. And so she kind of coined that term. But really, I think people in the D&I world talk about it just, it's being this kind of overlapping, if a person identifies as more than one thing that could be an ism. So, if it's like I identify as a woman of color, so I'm a woman, which is someone who could be ismed against, and a person of color, someone who could be ismed against. That's the best way that I can describe it. But those two things, like the interaction in that thing, is a different experience than maybe just a woman, a white woman, or just a person of color. We talked about, I didn't talk about it, I don't think, in that segment, but we talked about during the suffragist movement, when the women were claiming the right to vote and getting the right to vote, white women did. Black men had already had the right to vote, but somewhere like Black women were missed. And not to mention like every single other race out there of person was also missed. And so we just, there's just these intersectionality pieces that we just need to digest a little bit. Yeah, it's interesting though. There's just layers, right? It's layers of experiences to unpack, I think.
Jen, you used history there in explaining the context and some of the things you're thinking about. MLK Day, what are some of the things that brings into focus?
I actually am so glad you asked me that question, because I have been thinking about this all day today. This is gonna be a lot, but that's okay. We're gonna go there. So when the attack on the Capitol happened last week or 2 weeks ago now, I had an emotional, visceral reaction. And I also had the same emotional reaction the other day. If you read my Twitter, saw my Twitter, I was parked next to a truck that had Confederate flags flying off the back of their truck bed. And my body was like curling inside. My palms are sweaty. I'm like, like it just gets tight, because of what I believe the Confederate flag to represent, and the events in the Capitol, seeing a Confederate flag proudly being walked through the Capitol. It's a very hard visual for me personally to take. But in that same moment, when I was having those visceral reactions, MLK always talked about that, like, love, only love can drive out hate. Like he always has said that. That's one of his biggest quotes ever. Hate will not drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so I've really come back to that a lot lately, and trying to live that out every day. There's so many things. Forget the politics, forget the big things. There's so many things that we can get mad at any given day. Scott forgot to take the garbage out. I get mad at him for that, but I can't hate him for that. Like, love has got to drive out hate. That's the only way it can happen. And so when you talk about MLK and his messages, I really go back to that. At least I have been lately. And again, we're all on our own journey. We all been, we all reflect and try and be better people, I hope we do. But that's what I've been ruminating over my head for a while. And I've actually been tying it to faith as well, because I have a pretty strong faith. So yeah, that was a big answer. Sorry.
Oh, that's awesome. As you look back on your journey, and you quoted MLK, which is one of my favorite. I have it written down right here as we're talking. But what other people of color have you looked at as leaders, as people that you can latch onto and say, I can hang on to this message, and I can be a better person, or I can be a leader? Are there other people of color, or maybe it's not a person of color?
Well, I think so I have a lot of mentors and people that I lean on that are close to me, and some are people that identify as non-white, and some don't, and I think of like my former athletic director, Jeff Swenson, at Augsburg, white guy, middle class, but he's been a wrestling coach in the middle of an inner city school for the longest, forever. And him and I would have these conversations where he definitely would say, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, but I'm here to listen and here to talk and talk it through. He was always trying to, like, people who like to learn, well, it doesn't need to be from me, but just people who are like to improve themselves in that way, I think is important. I always look up to people like that. I think of, big names. I mean, the Obamas, and not even getting political. I really do. That was a very big moment in our country, when we had the first African-American president. That was huge. And so, and I'm actually in his book, I'm reading his book right now, and listening or reading his book and his reflections on leadership and what it's like to lead at that level, has been eye-opening for me, and it's unbelievable. And he talks about in the book how he was, so like this, and he wanted to get, he wanted to, I don't know, what was one of the subjects was like, he wanted to withdraw troops from Iraq, ASAP, and he was going to do that, and all the politicians who put them there in the first place were stupid, blah, blah, blah. And it took him like a week to realize that he's an idiot, and like, what is he thinking? That can't happen overnight. Like so someone who can take these feelings and theories and learn, and when you talk about history and like learning as they go and get better as they go, like those are the people that I think about that I look up to. People who aren't afraid to be wrong, and people who are engaging and who aren't, like the other quote, I don't know who said it, but if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I love that quote. I think that's huge. I fully try to listen to that quote all the time. So I guess I didn't give you many names, but a couple in there.
That's why me and him hang out in the room all by ourselves, because we can argue who's the smartest one. And I'm never the smartest one in the room. So, and you mentioned Jeff Swenson. Go back to the Augsburg. For you out there that don't know Jeff Swenson, you mentioned wrestling coach, and I talked about Devin George's NBA banner up at Augsburg. Well, on the other wall is, I don't know, 20, 25 national championship wrestling banners. I mean, this guy has had a great career. And quick story, this is way off topic, but when I was coaching at Augsburg, when they had their wrestle-offs, he would bring basketball coaches down there, and we would watch, and he would literally say, "This is for the national championship, because whoever wins this is going to win the national championship." Wow. And you want to talk about some intense practices. I mean, so, what a great man, and what a great mentor that you had there. And you mentioned, you're biracial, you're in a biracial relationship, you have a biracial daughter. What's your hope for her growing up in this crazy world we're living in? Scott and I talk about this a lot, because we have the same wishes that every parent, I think, wants for their children. They want them to be in the world that's better than what it is now, right? And so we just don't know what it's going to be like. We are very intentional. I will tell you that we're very intentional about where we bring her and who she's exposed to. We would love her to have access to lots of different cultures, and we're just very intentional about that. And different languages, we try and bring her around places that she's going to hear different languages, because we want her to be well-rounded and have that. It's very different than how I think Scott would say he grew up. And in a lot of ways, the way I grew up in a very white neighborhood, middle class. I mean, I grew up by Cretan High School in St. Paul. It was the private high school in St. Paul. And so I think and a white middle class family too. And so I wasn't exposed to a whole lot either until my school days. So I think we're just very much more intentional about it. So we're trying. But yeah, I hope the world's a little bit better for her when she's, if not, watch out, because she is feistier than I am. I don't know. I remember praying and wishing for a daughter that was going to be standing up for herself and not taking anything from anybody. I just didn't mean against me when I'm trying to get her to like do something. Because she practices every day against us. Well, Scott must be doing a good job, because she hasn't knocked on the door.
I know. I might stay down here forever. Pretty impressed right now.
So before we wrap it up, Mick, any other thoughts or questions for Coach Jacobs?
No questions, but this has been very enjoyable, and it would seem like a lot of the people we have on, it's like you want to talk to them again, because there's so many things that we'd like to hear about, especially your views on society right now and race, and ways that we should all be thinking about these things. And these are challenging questions, and no easy answers, but certainly reflection and thought and listening are they have to be part of the equation as we move forward. So I really thank you for providing that.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me. And you're right. They are tough, but we have to be willing to have those tough conversations to be able just to move a little bit. And it's baby steps. It's baby steps. And I may be not in the majority that want that kind of change. I recognize my privilege in that I happen to be biracial, so I'm a little bit safer to talk to about some of those things. But it also lets me open the door and have conversations with people that might not normally have conversations. So yeah, I agree. And it's time. It's time.
Yeah, and you know, the wish or the hope would have been that we wouldn't have had these conversations because we've been past all this. But the reality is we're not. And I think, you know, for us, you know, even being able to speak to you, you know, because, you know, like Coach Swenson, we don't know what you go through on a daily basis. But do know that, you know, if somebody pulls up to me with 2 Confederate flags, I get that way too, because I'm like, all right, you know, this is different than me. You know, that guy obviously thinks a lot differently than I do. And so, you know, hopefully we can work together and, you know, make it a better place for everybody.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree. Thanks for having me, you guys.
All right. Well, good luck with your season.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Have you been to the Nook? Over by.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is, the burger's there. Are you kidding me?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right across the
absolutely.
street from that Cretan Durham.
Yeah. Mick went to St. Thomas. So.
Oh, got it.
I wasn't going to say anything there.
Now it makes sense.
Yeah.
150 years ago, though. Okay.
Yep. Lots of good times. I grew up right on the southeast side of the Highland Golf Course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right in that area. Yeah. Love that area.
Absolutely beautiful. All right. Well, again, thank you for your time, and we'll do this again. We enjoyed the conversation and getting to know you and hearing some great thoughts on a very important day. Not because it's my birthday, okay? You know,
Happy birthday.
but you know, celebrating the life and the accomplishments in the history of Martin Luther King Jr. and what he meant to this country and to all of us, white, black, biracial, whatever, you know, ethnicity or whatever intersectionality you are.
There you go. Yeah, identities. Yeah, no doubt. Awesome.
I really appreciate your time, and we will talk. Tell Scott and the little one hello, and we will talk to you soon.
I will. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Jen.